time to start the conversation. It's time for an unauthorized caucus.
It's caucus time.
It's caucus time. Oh boy, a caucus time it is. We've done this a lot this week already. You and I sitting in front, although the last one we didn't have to run the tech. So we get a little spoiled, but oh boy. Welcome in, folks. First caucus in a couple of weeks. We're, like we said, doing this semi-regular schedule. We'll see. We're going to get back on the horse here. We'll figure out exactly how it looks. But we got a big one today, a very fun one ahead with a guest, and we actually got to catch up with him just a couple of weeks ago, or last week. I guess we caught up with him last week, so we were able to put that together, and we'll get to all of that today. But first things first, the housekeeping. Thanks for being here. Go to unauthorizedcaucus.com. That's the homepage for all of this stuff. You can find it's the Substack for us. You can subscribe to the email notifications there. You can see our great sponsors there. Wide Awake Clothing, we got a link for them. Really neat stuff. A promo code for T-Rex Inc., another set of really cool apparel and mugs and some neat things. All pro-America, God, family, country. So go and do that. If you are listening on the podcast, please give us a rating and review wherever it is you're listening. That would be hugely helpful. And, of course, don't forget to go to phyllisschlafly.com. We want you to check out the Eagles, the big reason that we're here, the library that we sit in, the building here, all sorts of amazing things over there. And the home of what we did this week, phyllisschlafly.com/collegians. Mason, what did we do this week? A 48-hour wild turnaround time, that's for sure. But where were we?
We were in Washington, D.C. at Rumble Studios, the official D.C. Rumble Studios. And we were doing the 30-second Phyllis Schlafly Collegians. And frankly, it was awesome. We got a ton of great feedback. We had a great time doing it. I think all of our guests had a fun time. And you can tell that they're having fun. You can tell that they're enjoying the event. And it was a great event. Except for Arn, he was a little sick. But he was a trooper. And
Man, I appreciate so much that you get a guest and you have this planned out weeks ahead of time. And someone's like, well, I'm sick. So, and you expect, I can't come. And then he's like, can I just turn my camera off and go audio only so you don't have to, I can hit the mute button and, as he said, hack up a lung and you don't have to watch me. And I'm like, you want to do it even while you're sick? Yeah, heck yeah, man. We'll figure that out. So that was, we had an awesome time. Big 4-hour broadcast Tuesday night. You'll find it over on our Rumble channel for Phyllis Schlafly Eagles. So if you're watching here on Unauthorized Caucus, then go back over to Phyllis Schlafly Eagles. You'll find it there, the Collegians broadcast 32. Building America's Golden Age. Building America's Golden Age was our theme this year. And we talked with 6 individuals over the course of those 4 hours. So there were, 40-minute long-form discussions. But we talked with Ed Martin, our old pal. Eagle Ed Martin sat down with us. Garrett Ziegler of Marco Polo. Arn McIntyre. Mike Howell of the Oversight Project was there. Also, we talked to Scott M. Greer, 6'2", IQ 187. And Josiah Lippincott. It was a phenomenal set of discussions. We went everything from the nuts and bolts of what's happening right now in Congress and the Justice Department into what I like to think of
how we get to denaturalization.
Well, but it was, it wasn't just the nuts and bolts of what's happening. We're talking about big, beautiful, bold, visionary ideas, not just.
It was a visionary event. That was our whole theme. We're building America's golden age. So what's our vision? What do we want to see happen? And I think almost everybody said mass deportations were the key to bringing about the golden age of America. They're certainly the first step.
And see, that's the thing, though. The beauty of this event was it wasn't just, we need mass deportations and here's how we do it. It was answering the why question. Why? Because what's the end goal? We our end goal last year in the election was to get Trump elected and to get a new government. But really, what's the purpose of that? It is to fundamentally renew the United States of America, to restore the Constitution, to renew this country that we had. And it's being lost now to mass unassimilated immigration, both legal and illegal.
Yep.
You want to talk about temporary, protected status and asylum seekers and the racket that all of that has become. That must be dealt with, and a lot of other things along the way. But what I loved about all this is we were articulating, or our guests were, not just how we get there, but where it is that we're getting to. Here's the goal of how we ought to think of this. It's not just conservatism, it was Americanism.
Right.
This is the identity and why and where we're going. So it was so cool. What was a highlight what was a highlight speaker or moment for you? There were so many, but what was yours?
Yeah, I think that the those last two guests were really the highlight for me when we got into a lot of topics, not as many topics as I would have liked to get into. But hey, we talked to them both about caucus, so that could be a potential future caucus episode. But if you don't want to wait for that, you can go check it out now. But yeah, I think Josiah was on fire, especially talking about immigration.
With a few of those speakers, with just my notes and what was in my head and a couple things I wrote down while they were talking, I thought,
we
my
could
gosh,
have made it like 3 times as long.
Could we have another 40 minutes with you and we'll just go off on this tangent? But I love that because it really is you see an event like this or you get to take part in one and you're reminded, what was it, Charlie Kirk, I think, warned Gavin Newsom during one of his inaugural podcasts, this is where the right lives, and the left just can't do it because these require long-form discussions, agreements, disagreements. You need to know what it is you believe, be willing to change your mind, and be able to articulate what it is that you think. And the left isn't really thoughtful. They're following marching orders and propaganda.
Right.
So this is just such a unique thing to take part in, and we had a great time. phyllisschlafly.com/collegians. When you're watching this, the entire recap video is there, all 4 hours, but all 6 standalones are coming. Of course, you will expect we're going to have some clips too. We'll continue to share that stuff with you. So go to phyllisschlafly.com, sign up for the email list there. Go to phyllisschlafly.com/collegians for everything. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles X and Facebook particularly. Also Truth Social. We're a few other places. But you want to be subscribed and following because a lot of this is going to continue to come out in different forms because there's so much in that 4 hours. It just needs to be discussed and brought out and clipped on its own. So that was huge. For me, I don't know. I mean, Mike Howell was awesome on the more nuts and bolts side of it. He just unleashed from the Epstein files, which that came out this week, or didn't come out this week, I guess I should say. From the Epstein files to the auto pen to the funding for these No Kings kind of protests, as he said, fizzled. He was just on fire, and they are on fire, finding evidence and pulling it out. It was great. So the whole thing you need to go and see. The whole darn thing.
Yep.
But today, we have another whole darn thing that you need to see as well. We caught up last week with Alex Newman. He is the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media, also one of the senior editors at the New American Magazine. And Alex is, of course, someone you've heard from before on a lot of our Eagle stuff, but we got him here on Caucus really to dive into the Ukraine-Russia conflict particularly, but also generally. There's a big rub now as the war hawks, the neocons, the globalists continue to want to shove us farther into these foreign entanglements. The push against them is being kind of cast off as, you isolationists. And that's really a pejorative. But non-interventionalist, yes. We want to become non-interventionalist. But the key is in moving toward a non-interventionalist position, how do we not get distracted off into crazy land, which that's where the left wants to pigeonhole us. And also there are some voices out there doing it and suddenly rewriting and revising history in an anti-leftist way, or an anti-modern leftist way, but also in an equally unhelpful way.
Right.
Like suddenly Hitler's not such a bad guy and the Jews are behind everything. And you start seeing a lot of this stuff where some people are actually advocating those positions. A lot of people are being accused of advocating those positions. And that is a distraction away from the real conversation of, no. I just don't want us to be the one who continues to aggress and instigate what's going on.
Right.
That requires not just a Twitter conversation. That requires some real in-depth conversations. That's what we had a chance to sit down with Alex, and especially in Russia and Ukraine, kind of pick apart, okay, where does this fall with Putin and Zelensky and the history of this and what our involvement should be in NATO and all of that stuff. So we're about to get into that with Alex over the course of the next probably 40 or 45 minutes. So we knew we could catch up with him only when we could, and that it would have to be released a little bit later. But this is just another follow-up conversation. So when you get done with this episode, go over and get Collegians, and then we'll be back here at the end to wrap it up with a couple more things. So without further ado, Alex Newman. Well, hi again, everybody, and we're back with Mr. Alex Newman on the line with us. That's right, a name that I know you all know and probably follow as well. The head over at the Liberty Sentinel organization, also one of the editors at the New American. Alex has been involved in so much of what is going on, what we talk about, the topics across the world, and also has a long history, stretches back to 2014, I think, when you co-authored the book, The Crimes of the Educators with Sam Blumenfeld. That's when you came on my radar, came on Phyllis Schlafly's radar, I think, in a big way. And we've just kind of followed along ever since. You're deep into the heart of the same issues we follow. So we wanted to kind of tap into this topic here about, well, revising or deconstructing revisionist history a little bit. And I'm glad you're here with us. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you what, this is a little bit more. We've had this floating around in our heads for a while, really since was it September, October? The flashpoint for this conversation, I feel like, as the Trump administration won office in November, has come in 2025, really disentangling ourselves, getting rid of the globalist structure, the globalist mindset in the U.S., has kind of opened up this whole window to a discussion of post-World War II on. And I feel like one of the big flashpoints of that last fall when Tucker Carlson had on Daryl Cooper, the guy from Martyr Made? Is his podcast, yep. Martyr Made? And that just kind of brought it to the mainstream for a lot of people. Now, this is no endorsement of Daryl Cooper, but that really brought forward the big conversation about, wait a minute, I feel like we should have something a little bit less ideologue fashion, Russia and the Middle East and our own image, and maybe we should have a more realist foreign policy. But then how far is too far? Because now a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, you're undoing the World War II history timeline that we know, and suddenly you're trying to tell me Winston Churchill might not be the greatest guy, and maybe Hitler and Putin aren't so bad. And I thought, hold on, there has to be some sort of middle ground here. So I got a bunch of topics to maybe cover, but my main goal is to say, okay, let's talk to someone who's deep into the world of paying attention what's happening now in Europe, the communist history, the Marxist history marching through the world, the global order that is trying to be established and that the Trump administration seems to be fighting back on what we've wanted for a long time. How far is too far? How do we really red pill on fighting back against the globalist agenda without necessarily going too far? So that's kind of the main thought behind this conversation. So if you don't have anything to add, I want to launch into a primary question and go from there.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. First of all, Alex, how would you, now we've got this Iran conflict, well, I hate to say behind us, but a big chunk of it kind of taken care of and moving forward. How would you rate the Trump administration so far when it comes to their handling of this, particularly foreign policy minded, looking at the globalist agenda and how we maintain America's national interests rather than global entanglements? You think they're doing all right so far, or is there some big room for improvement?
Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's great to be here, and I appreciate it. I think Trump, considering the circumstances, is actually doing a heroic job on pushing back the tide of globalism. Now, I want to caution people to understand that is not necessarily sustainable if everybody just goes back to sleep and says, well, Trump's got it taken care of, we're good. And what I mean by that, and you can see this so clearly in what's been happening in Washington, D.C., a lot of the great changes that have come through executive orders, executive policies, rollbacks of regulations, all things that are entirely in the hands of the executive branch, and all things, I should add, that can be rolled back the moment we get another deep state Democrat president. And we saw that after the first Trump administration. Biden came in day one, took out his pen, and just started undoing incredible amounts of policy changes that Donald Trump had brought in that, frankly, were really very good. So what I'm concerned about is that we see among conservatives, among the populists, among the MAGA movement, this kind of sense that, well, Trump's in charge, and so everything's fine now. We can just go back to watching our football. And no, you absolutely cannot, right? We have at best a little 3.5-year reprieve here. And I think the big, beautiful bill illustrates this very well. Trump has even spoken out about some of these things, the green tax credit nonsense in there. If he wants to enshrine his agenda with some sense of permanence, it's going to have to be enshrined into federal law. Just passing it through executive order, it moves the conversation in the right direction, it moves U.S. policy in the right direction, but it's a very temporary phenomenon. So I think he's doing a good job of articulating the right things. He has done a great job getting us out of. I mean, the climate is one area that I follow really closely. He's done incredible things there. It's so much that the fake media hasn't even wrapped their heads around it yet. Like they still don't even know all the things that he has done that are incredible for our side, for we who want to maintain American sovereignty, destroy the climate scam, stop the use of the climate change hoax as a pretext for globalism and one world religion. He's done so much good work there. But again, it's all on the executive side. And very little of this is being enshrined into the one big, beautiful bill. So I'm very pleased with what's been going on. When I saw the strikes on Iran, I'll be the first to admit I was a little bit concerned that this might get us dragged into a broader Middle East conflict. And I still don't think we're out of the woods on that yet. I mean, the deep state swamp is obsessed with this. They've got the leaked Defense Intelligence Agency report claiming that, Trump's strikes didn't do anything. They're still going to get right back. You've got the International Atomic Energy Agency at the UN basically claiming that Iran is still just weeks or months away from building a nuclear bomb. So I don't think we're necessarily out of the woods yet on getting dragged into a broader war. And if the globalists can't kick it off in the Middle East, maybe they'll move over back to Europe, Russia, Ukraine. I was a little bit disappointed to see the idea that we're going to be sending more Patriot missiles to the Ukrainian government. There's actually a simple solution to a lot of these conflicts, and that is for the U.S. government to stop doing dumb stuff. We have to remember the U.S. government brought the Ayatollah crazies to power in the first place by overthrowing the Shah of Iran. The U.S. government helped build up communist China, which is the big ally, of course, of both Putin and the Iranians. You've got, people talk a lot about the state of Israel and Trump needs to stop supporting it. Oh, okay, whatever. The U.S. government is giving 3 to 4 times as much aid to the Islamic governments, many of them sworn to the destruction of Israel, as they're giving to Israel. So why are we continuing to do this kind of stuff? I'm glad that good things are happening, but I think a lot more needs to be done. And to sum it up, I think we need to get Congress on board here, and Trump really needs to start doing some arm twisting. I don't think Massey is actually the real enemy. I think it's the Rhino Caucus. Mm-hmm. So I wish he would focus some of his fire on them.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it is. The U.S. is a weird country for, especially in the Middle East. It seems like we're funding both sides of every conflict, and maybe that's kind of a holdover from the Cold War, where it's okay, we got to fund anybody who we can get our money to, so we can have this bulwark against the rise of the USSR. And now the USSR is gone, so we're just funding everybody on both sides of a conflict, and it's like, oh, that's our taxpayer dollars shooting our taxpayer dollars. Like the meme with the missiles, that it's like somehow also my taxpayer dollars. But it seems like one thing that's really not like that whatsoever is the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where that is another hegemon that has their own interests. Like, they're not propped up by us. We're not funding them actively while we're funding the other side. And that's been going on for a few years now. I mean, 3-4 years, something like that. Maybe not that long, but still, it's. I was hoping that Trump would be able to get it done sooner. So I was wondering if you could give us some light on the situation of what's going on in the conflict there, and the way that Trump has changed the game in terms of that conflict versus how it was handled during the Biden administration.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about the situation with Russia. And I would start by saying, once again, U.S. foreign policy has played a key role in bringing us to this point. Whether it was Bill Clinton forcing the Ukrainians to disarm and hand all their nuclear weapons over to the Russians, whether it was Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, when the Wall Street bigwigs funded the Bolshevik Revolution and brought the communists to power. And I think if you look at Putin, even though the fake media portrays him as this kind of independent lone tyrant, I think the reality is he's been deeply connected to the Western globalist establishment for decades. First of all, he was the head of the KGB, or the successor to the KGB, so very deeply connected to the communist world. Then he was a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, as Klaus Schwab proudly announced at Harvard University. That's a pretty big red flag. Then you look at the relationship that he had with Henry Kissinger, one of the key architects of the New World Order, basically the poodle for the Rockefeller dynasty. The guys were like best buds. Kissinger would go over to Moscow. They'd have a military parade. They'd give him a bunch of awards. He'd go have dinner at Putin's personal residence. Putin would come into New York. He'd go eat dinner with Henry Kissinger at his house. I mean, these guys were like two peas in a pod. And if you look at the actions of Putin, forget the words, because words mean nothing when they come from the mouths of politicians. If you look at the actions of Putin, he has helped accelerate the push for a new world order more dramatically than almost any other single geopolitical character on the world stage today. And even if you look at the strategy that Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, the National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission with David Rockefeller, if you look at the strategy that they laid out for bringing about world order, it involved two critical components: war and regionalization. So Putin provided the war, right, by invading Ukraine, seemingly unprovoked, although he's got his own reasons why he claims that was necessary. And that, of course, has been used as a pretext to deepen, for example, the European Union. Oh, we got to empower the EU to have its own military. We've got to build up NATO. Now we got to bring the Swedes and the Finns and maybe even the Swiss into NATO. We've got to expand that very rapidly. This has been a huge boon to globalism. And then you look at how Putin himself has responded to this. He is in the process of building what he calls the Eurasian Union, which is actually modeled on the European Union. And if you go back a little over a decade, they were talking about merging the Eurasian Union with the European Union. They were talking about having a free trade customs union from Lisbon all the way to Vladivostok. So this is the exact strategy for world order that Henry Kissinger laid out in 2014 in his book, World Order. He said the contemporary quest for world order involves creating regional orders within the various regions and then relating these regional orders one to another. So you look at what they're doing in Africa, right? The U.S. government, the Europeans, and the Chinese are imposing an African Union on the people of Africa. You look at Latin America, you've got multiple transnational governments being birthed as we speak. The CELAC, all right, the UNASUR, the Mercosur, all these different things. And some of them are kind of waning, some are growing, but we see the same thing. You look at Southeast Asia, you look at the Pacific area with Australia and some of its allies in that region. All over the world is being divided up into regional governments, and Putin seems to be one of the big drivers of this. Then you look at the alliances that Putin has with the Chinese, with the Iranians, through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's almost perfectly in line with the script that Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote out back in the 70s, that Henry Kissinger outlined as recently as 2014. And then you go back a little further. You go back to 1962. This is such an important report. I wish more conservatives knew of it and understood it. But the U.S. State Department commissioned a report. They hired a guy called Lincoln Bloomfield, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, came out of the intelligence community. And the title of the report gives it all away: World Effectively Controlled by the United Nations. And the strategy, he said, if we want a world order, if we want a world effectively controlled by the UN, and we just rely on organic processes, it's going to take us 200 years or more to actually get there. Right? If we want to accelerate this process, he laid it out in plain English, no beating around the bush. He said we need war, the threat of war, grave crises, and expanded regionalization of governance through customs unions. It's exactly what we're watching here. So I know Putin is painted as this kind of rogue strongman, and he's a strongman. He's a gangster. I think conservatives are making a big mistake by falling in love with this guy. But he is, at the very least, working for the agenda that's been laid out by the globalists. And I'll say one more thing, and I'll kick it back to you guys. Just last week, I was talking to Salih Berisha. He was the first non-communist elected president of Albania after the ostensible fall of communism. And there had been the alleged disputes, real and sometimes I think imagined, between the Albanian communist regime and the Soviet Union and some of the Yugoslavia, etc. But one of the things that I asked him about were the revelations of a man I consider to be one of the most important defectors in the entire history of the Soviet Union. That was Anatoly Golichin. He defected through Finland, came to the United States, and warned that the Soviets, through Department D in the KGB, the disinformation department, were engaged in long-range strategic planning where they were going to try to deceive the West into believing that communism had collapsed. And he gave a series of about 206 very specific predictions about what would happen. This was late 70s when he was talking to the U.S. government, early 80s when he published books on this for the American people because the government wasn't paying attention. And he warned that there would be a fake collapse of the Soviet Union. He warned that we'd see phony liberalization in Eastern Europe. And I think to some extent that liberalization has been real. You look at what happened in Hungary, Poland, some of these places. So some really positive developments came out of there. But he even warned, for example, that this guy Lech Walesa was going to lead an anti-communist revolution in Poland, and that he was working for the KGB. And of course, people said, that's crazy, that's ludicrous. Well, now we've got the KGB files showing his name was Bolek for the KGB, right? He was working for the KGB all along. So all these different things, you put it all together, and I asked Salih Berisha, former president of Albania, now leader of the opposition, was Golichin right? Were they doing a fake collapse of communism and then keeping power under new disguises, right? Like in Albania, the Communist Party used to be known as the Labour Party, has now renamed itself to the Socialist Party. In Bulgaria, the Communist Party renamed itself to the Socialist Party. But it's the same people, right? The same mass murderers who just a few decades earlier were sending people off to their deaths. And he said, yes, that's what's happened. And George Soros is helping them, by the way. So I think what's happening geopolitically, even though it looks like a world fragmenting into needless and mindless conflict, is actually much more carefully engineered than the fake media would have us believe.
And see, this is really interesting to me to hear you kind of put it together, because, you know, I know as a lot of folks are engaging for the first time, and this is one of the things, you know, when Tucker has an interview that, of course, you know, the reason we have to mention his name so much is because he's got such a huge platform. Millions and millions and millions of people watch it. To me, it's interesting because I feel like we're watching someone who's worked in the media establishment his whole life kind of red pill or deconstruct a lot of this for the first time. So I'm not taking what he says as gospel. I'm taking it as this guy's kind of learning along what he actually thinks and believes. So I take it with a grain of salt. There's a lot of people, though, that are kind of running all the way to the side. So when I'd say, yeah, I'm not so sure if Russia is necessarily our primary adversary in the world, I'm a little bit more worried about China. And I'm kind of ordering things here. That's different than saying, oh, well, Russia is some sort of, you know, Christian nation, and why aren't they our friend in this? And I'm like, well, pump the brakes, hold on. I don't think that Vladimir Putin necessarily is trying to, you know, reinstate the United Soviet Socialist Republics, but neither is he necessarily a good dude. However, if we're keeping friends and enemies at different lengths of arm here, I got bigger problems with a few other places in the world. So trying to kind of pull some of the MAGA movement who are really engaging, kind of like Tucker, for the first time in a new way, they're you know, the blinders are coming off. My goal is to say, okay, how do we as thoughtful conservatives with a lot of context and history kind of guide people into understanding the reality of what these conflicts are? So, you know, when you do that, it sounds like you're putting a few things together. Pull us back, if you would. If we walk that all the way back to kind of the beginning of this globalist age, where would you put that? Would you say like post World War II, the formation in 45 of the United Nations? Is that where a lot of these things really, the globalists start to actually succeed in putting together a plan and moving forward?
Yeah, I think post-World War II was a turning point for these people in that they finally started seeing some major success. They had a major attempt in the aftermath of World War I, right? And it's interesting when you talk to people about World War I, very few people have a real understanding when you press somebody. Why did we fight World War I? You know, didn't some archduke get shot somewhere in the Balkans? Like, people don't even know, right? But millions of American men were shipped off to Europe. Millions of people died. The women were forced out into the factories because the men were all off fighting in Europe. The children were then put in government brainwash camps, the majority of American children, for the first time in U.S. history. Mm-hmm. So it was an incredible transformation of our society, of our attitudes, of our values, even of the role of government. And of course, Woodrow Wilson, I believe, was a very critical player in this. And that's around the time when you really start seeing some of these globalist plans solidify. Cecil Rhodes, the South African mining magnate who left his massive, massive fortune to the construction of this one world system, as outlined by very prominent historian, Bill Clinton mentor, Carol Quigley at law or history professor. He did the book Anglo-American Establishment, and also Hope for Our Times, or what was the book? I've got it behind me. Tragedy and Hope, History of the World in Our Times. Hugely important books. And what he laid out there was a vision for a one world system that would bring the entire world under the rule of these elites. And so World War I was a big push for them, but they failed. Right? They tried to get everybody sucked into the League of Nations, and the U.S. Senate very wisely said that we are actually not going to participate in that. Thank you very much. So they had a big push, and they failed. So that's when they set up the Council on Foreign Relations to kind of be the outpost of that here on our soil. And World War II was really, like I said, a turning point for this effort. Frankly, I don't think you can understand World War II properly without understanding that Adolf Hitler was, first of all, very, very close ideologically to the communists in Moscow. And second of all, was supported at every step of the way by the very same evil-doing elitists that we've got in Wall Street, that we've got in Washington, D.C. And that's been very, very thoroughly documented by people like Stanford historian Anthony Sutton in Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. You look at some of the key people who inspired Adolf Hitler and Joseph Mengele. These were the same people that the Rockefellers were funding in the United States, doing research on eugenics. People thought that some races are better than this progressive vision of kind of breeding humans like cows to create a super race. The ties between the Nazis and the elitists in the United States were massive and overwhelming. And the ties between the Nazis and the Soviets were massive and overwhelming. In fact, the New York Times reported before the advent of World War II that Hitler's followers regarded Vladimir Lenin as the second greatest man in the world, second only to Adolf Hitler, right? And so when the fake history tries to create this massive divide between the communists and the Nazis, I think they're being very, very disingenuous. But then in the aftermath of World War II, what we saw was pedal to the metal, full-blown effort to bring the world under the global system. Of course, they gave birth to the United Nations. Well, I should say we had the Alliance, United Nations, that fought World War II. Then they gave birth to the organization, the structure in San Francisco that we today know as the United Nations. They created almost all the architecture of globalism that people know today. UNESCO, the UN's education agency, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, even the nucleus of what eventually became the European Union was created in the aftermath of World War II. It was the European Coal and Steel Community, and that eventually morphed and grew into this European superstate that today has more power than actually the U.S. government has over its constituent parts. So I think World War II was a major, major turning point. And I think we need to go back and revisit some of the lies that we have been taught about all this. Now, I don't know a lot about the individual you mentioned, Cooper. I understand he's got some sort of affection for Adolf Hitler, which I think is a major, major, I mean, maybe he doesn't put it that way, but I think that's a major, major mistake to look at that analysis as realistic. But we do need to ask ourselves some questions like, how is it that Hitler came to power? What was the role of the Bushes, right? And there's a lot of work that's been done on this. Granddaddy Bush, Senator Prescott Bush, actually got in hot water for his role as a director at Union Bank in New York for helping to fund the rise of the Nazis. So all these questions, I think, need to be asked. And I don't think you can have a proper understanding of the globalist history, if you will, without understanding that war is a critical catalyst for bringing these changes about, and World War II was an absolutely essential turning point in the whole thing, including re-engineering the attitudes of Americans. So,
well, so this then asks me the question, because I'm not super familiar with the history of Darryl Cooper's work. I knew that part of one of the things that set a lot of people off was his condemnation of, and you correct me, Mason, if I'm going off on this, he kind of condemned Churchill and some of the European, the Allied leadership.
Wait, his exact words were that he said that Churchill is the chief villain of World War II. So it's very easy to instantly take that as, you must like Hitler. I don't think he likes Hitler. He's done a lot of stuff on like the history of persecution of the Jews and stuff like that throughout European history. So well, I don't think he's, but he put himself in a situation where it's very easy to take what he said as something totally the opposite.
And we live in a world that hates context. People don't want to stop and actually ask, well, what do you mean by that? To explain it to me further. You said, and now we have a meme, and everyone knows what they think. But I mean, it almost sounds like you are giving somewhat a similar but a more nuanced perspective, in the sense that there were a lot of forces that wanted this to happen. So whether you want to say that FDR and his cabinet were complicit, or Churchill and his war cabinet were duped, or there were forces that were moving decades before this even happened, there were different pieces of puzzles trying to move forward some sort of globalist, elitist agenda that we responded to in a way that definitely was a catalyst for that, World War II. Now, again, you kind of find yourself, I would say you almost find yourself in a sticky situation, like, well, what are we supposed to do? Now there is active war. And it reminds me, and the reason I say that, it reminds me very much of where we are now. Trump would like peace, but also, well, we have a lot of factors going in here. I can't just do exactly what I'd like to do. So fine, I'll bomb these facilities in Iran and then stop and say, no more, I did part of what you wanted, now you shut up and listen to me. It almost seems like we have some of those same factors moving now, and a leader who, instead of leaning into them, the big moralist cause to go and free Europe, is finally saying, well, hold on, there's a measure to this, and I'm going to draw the line somewhere here. That's why I think this conversation is very relevant, because it's almost like we're on the edge of another war that would do something very similar, and we've just seen it the world over with COVID and what authoritarianism will do when given fertile ground in which to blossom. So, well, that's That's fascinating. That's a lot of very fascinating information. Mason, you had notes too. I'm going to let you ask the next spearhead question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it'd be good to dive a little bit more into, the legacy of post World War II, because, like, obviously right after that we have the Cold War. It's not exactly a unipolar world order right off the jump, unless it was. I mean, there are a lot of ties between, like you said, the Bolsheviks being funded by Wall Street. This is kind of a problem of our own doing, and I've seen some indications that the Cold War, a lot of it was kind of just for show, and that there was a lot of cooperation between the Western world and our supposed enemy, the communist world, but that conflict at the same time allowed both sides to kind of benefit and get our tendrils into all sorts of parts of the world. So I was wondering if you talk a little bit about that, about how the growth of globalism during the Cold War, which at its face seems like a period of conflict and divergence rather than convergence.
Yeah, so the history with the Soviet Union is absolutely essential, and this kind of goes right back to what we were talking about World War II. We've been lied to on every front. Now, during World War II, everybody who studied history knows that the Soviet Union was officially allied with the United States after Hitler broke the pact that they had with the Soviets. And at that time, Americans were being propagandized with this ridiculous idea that Uncle Joe, Joseph Stalin, one of the worst butchers to ever walk on this planet, that he was some kind of nice, great friend, ally of America. And so using that as the pretext, the U.S. government, which, by the way, was filled with communists, Harry Dexter White, George Martin, I mean, all these like high-level communists serving in FDR's administration. Alger Hiss, of course, who helped betray Eastern Europe and much of the world at Yalta, filled with communists. They used that as an excuse to build up the Soviet Union. I mean, we literally had the American taxpayer paying to build weapons factories, truck factories, tank factories in the Soviet Union. There's an incredible book, Major Jordan's Diaries, written by Major Jordan. He was serving at an air base up in Montana where the Lend-Lease program was shipping all kinds of stuff over to the Soviet Union. And what he found out was we weren't just shipping them weapons and technology and food and tobacco and everything. We were actually shipping them plans to build nuclear weapons. We were shipping them the hardware that they needed to build nuclear weapons because they weren't capable of making it themselves. What in the world? That kind of throws the whole history upside down, right? And I think the reality is you can't understand the Soviet Union as really its own independent threat. It was, first of all, the revolution was funded by the globalist Wall Street bankers. Fully documented, incontrovertible proof. The Morgan interest, the Rockefeller interest, the Swedish megabank SEB, or what eventually became SEB. The German government was involved. This was, of course, long before the Nazis came to power. And they wanted the Soviet Union to exist. And then you can ask yourself why. And I think there's a number of really good explanations for that. One, I think they needed this kind of conflict between freedom and slavery because the synthesis of that is kind of what they were doing with what they wanted to do toward the end goal. But also it provided the excuse for the U.S. government to do virtually anything, overtax us, spy on us, squander enormous amounts of money on regime change operations all over the world. I mean, how many governments did the U.S. government overthrow during the Cold War under the guise of fighting communism? And ironically, we probably helped the communists more than anybody. We probably helped them more than the Soviet Union, which people struggle to believe. Who put Fidel Castro in power? Right off our shore. You want to fight communist governments in Asia? You've got communists 90 miles from our shore. Who put him there? Well, the guy who was our U.S. ambassador to Havana at the time, Earl Smith, testified before the U.S. Senate that it was the U.S. government who put them there. We betrayed our ally, Fulgencio Batista, and we put in a mass murdering communist. And, of course, the New York Times provided air support that covered. They said he was the George Washington of Latin America, right? Fidel Castro. He was an anti-communist freedom fighter. That's how deranged these people are. They will lie to your face and tell you the opposite of the truth. And I really believe that we're in a parallel situation now when it comes to communist China. I don't think you can understand the communist Chinese threat without understanding that it has been built up from the get-go by the very same evil-doing globalists that we're talking about. And that was true when they brought Mao to power. That was true even during World War II. I mean, they allowed Stalin to join the war against Japan after we dropped a nuclear bomb on them. What? I mean, they were begging to surrender. Why would we want Stalin to join the war then? Well, so he could take Manchuria, so he could grab all the Japanese weapons and stockpiles and hand them to Mao and his buddies. We literally put an arms embargo on our ally, Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the Free Chinese, the nationalist Chinese, who was pro-American, who was Christian, who wanted a constitutional type Western government for the people of China. George Marshall bragged about putting an arms embargo on him. He lost countless men fighting alongside our men against the Japanese. Why would you betray him like that and bring Chairman Mao to power? And then you look at the decades following that. The World Economic Forum, the Rockefellers, I mean, openly building these people up. You had David Rockefeller writing in the New York Times in 1973 about how great the system was. He said the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. This was, 50 years ago, right, when Americans couldn't even go there. So fast forward to Bill Clinton. The guy got caught taking CCP money through Johnny Chung in exchange for access to our most sensitive military technology. So communist China is an existential threat to the United States of America today, and it is because the globalists wanted it that way. And I think if you want to know what the global system they're trying to build looks like, communist China is actually the closest model to that. Total control over everything, over thought, over speech, over economic activity, but with enough market forces that the whole thing doesn't collapse because they're destroying all the wealth, because they know central planning doesn't work for anything except to destroy things. So that's the model they're going for. And again, to go back to the Soviet Union for a moment, we have been deceived on such a massive level about that. And don't get me wrong, the Soviet system was evil. It was an existential threat to the United States of America, but only because the foreign policy establishment, the Council on Foreign Relations and all the rest of them wanted it to be that way. We were building them up. We were allowing them to have all of our technology. We were giving them money. And we saw this everywhere you looked, right? You looked at the war in Vietnam. On the one hand, we're sending tens of thousands of American young men to go die fighting communism in Vietnam. At the same time, we're giving aid to communist governments in Eastern Europe that are then funding the communist forces in Vietnam who are killing Americans. Now, as the great Secretary of Defense James Forrestal explained, consistency is never the hallmark of stupidity. If these people were merely stupid, occasionally they'd be making a mistake in our favor, right? But when you see this pattern, consistent, constantly building up our enemies, constantly betraying our allies, constantly usurping more and more power over our lives in the United States, you have to conclude that we're not being told the truth. And one of the clearest places you saw this was actually the education field. My late friend Charlotte Iserby came out. She served as senior advisor to Ronald Reagan on education. And she got to the Department of Education. I started looking through these documents, and she said, whoa, like they're literally merging the American education system with the Soviet system, and they're dumbing down American students on purpose. And I've got the documents to prove it. So she leaked them to Human Events and other publications, and they published them. Why would you do that? Right? Why would you do that? You look at the congressional investigation in the early 1950s, the Reese Committee and then the Cox Committee, the Select Committee to investigate tax-exempt organizations in the United States. The chief investigator, Norman Dodd, for this congressional committee, revealed in an interview before he died that after he was assigned to work on this investigation, he was summoned by the head of the Ford Foundation. Alan Geithner was his name. And he said, Alan Geithner told him in his office, you don't need to worry about investigating. I'll tell you what we're doing. He said, we're working with the White House to use our grant-making power to so alter life in the United States that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. So if you read Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, America's Role in the Technotronic Age, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. He's the guy who teamed up with David Rockefeller to form the Trilateral Commission and then served as National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter. It kind of lays out the plan there, right? He praises the Soviet Union as like the next step forward in the evolution of human society. He does have the obligatory criticisms in there. But then he says the American system is basically obsolete. And so now we need this kind of synthesis of the two systems, communist slavery and supposed freedom that we have in the West, to build, first of all, these regional governments and then the world order. So I think that's the key to understanding the Soviet Union. And I mentioned earlier the revelations of Anatoly Golitsyn. I think that's a critical part of the puzzle. I don't think Anatoly Golitsyn even understood how critical of a piece of the puzzle that was, because he was just looking at it from his narrow perspective as a bureaucrat who worked in Department D of the KGB. He didn't have the big picture. He didn't know that the Wall Street gazillionaires had funded the Bolshevik Revolution. He didn't understand the role of the Western globalists in bringing this all about. He just understood that narrow part. Hey, they're planning a fake collapse of communism so that eventually they can enslave the world, right? Out of those 206 predictions he made, about 200 of them have come true. The last one, the grand finale, is what he describes in his book as a second October revolution, where the whole world will then be brought under a global slave system. And I think that's the goal that the globalists have in mind. Not communism a la Soviet Union per se, but more akin to the communist Chinese style, like fascism, total control, but still on paper at least allowing some nominal private property ownership and things like that. Or as Klaus Schwab used to describe it, the stakeholder model. I think that's their vision for the world. And I think the whole Cold War was critical to bringing us to this point.
So is it fair to say that in a modern situation like we're looking at, taking all this history into context, in order to not just come up with anti-propaganda against the globalist propaganda and take it too far the other way, the good situation to look at this is to say, hold on, guys, it's not, nasty elitist forces trying to pump up Ukraine and NATO and our involvement in all of these things versus Vladimir Putin and Russia. These are almost two sides of the same coin. We need to extract ourselves from this and recognize all these folks are, at the end, serving kind of the same master, and America wants no part of this. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
I think that's a perfect assessment. And there's multiple levels to look at this at. I think once you look at it through a biblical lens, they don't even necessarily have to be meeting together in like a secret room, the smoky room and stuff. We as Christians, I could go into a church, and I do. Whenever I'm in another country, I go to a church, and guess what? We're all working on the same agenda. We're all working to disciple the nations. We're all working on the Great Commission, and I've never met these people. I don't even speak the same language as them, and yet we're all working toward the same goal. Well, I think for the enemy, the situation is much the same. It doesn't mean that Vladimir Putin is calling up his buddies at the CFR and saying, all right, guys, what do I do now? Right? But they're all working for this ultimate objective of a one world totalitarian religious, political, and economic system. They're like kind of the mafia, right? Yeah, sometimes they stab each other in the back. Sometimes they one wants to displace another and take the top dog spot. And so there's, infighting within them. It's not as monolithic as I think some people imagine. But I think that's essentially a very good way of summarizing what's going on here. And once you start untangling the deep state organizations like Bilderberg, CFR, the Skull and Bones, right? The guys who wrote the definitive book on Skull and Bones, Anthony Sutton, I've mentioned him multiple times today. He gave a really important sneak preview about how these people operate. In his book, it's called America's Secret Establishment, an Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones, which, by the way, he wrote using documents that Charlotte Iserby, Reagan's advisor on education, gave him. Her dad and her grandpa were both members. He said, change requires conflict, and conflict requires a clash of opposites. So you can't just have a left, you got to have a left and a right. And that's how you get the synthesis, which is what you're after. So I think that really is what we're watching now on the geopolitical chessboard. And I think it's important for people to understand that. I mean, you're not going to get this from watching the news. So you're better off turning off the TV and reading some books, getting a copy of the New American Magazine, turning on this podcast and sharing it with other people, because you're not going to hear this even from what we consider to be friendly media. It's above their pay grade.
Yeah. He just answered my last question that I was about to ask.
Well, yeah, no, I'm good. We know that you've got your own program that you got to get to, so we greatly appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, I was about to say, that was my last question. Our final minute or two was, tell us how. Who do we follow? Where do we look? How do we point our fellow Americans who are currently still red pilling, pulling back the blinders from this 20th century progressive globalist nonsense we've been involved in? Where do we tell people to look and make sure they are participating in truth and not just reacting to globalist propaganda with equally dumb but different anti-propaganda? Where do we look?
Amen. Well, thank you, gentlemen, again. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. And I would say start off with getting a subscription to the New American Magazine. I mean, this is a magazine that's been around longer than I have. And of course, they've been documenting all this for decades, right? So it's a really, really good source. And then you can get access to the archives that go back all the way to the 1950s. Great information. You can go to my website, libertysentinel.org. We put out a lot of stuff like this. I would encourage folks to get their children out of the government brainwash camps. They're going to get not just a fake version of history, but a fake version of everything. Plus, they'll be left basically handicapped, unable to educate themselves on the things that matter. So, I think homeschooling is great. Christian schools are great. I've got my own kids in classical conversations, but there's lots of great options out there. Absolutely essential for us as parents to focus on the next generation. We want the next generation to truly understand these things, to truly be able to think about these things, and to truly know God. So I would just urge people to strongly consider those. And free newsletter, libertysentinel.org. You can sign up for the free daily headlines at thenewamerican.com. And gentlemen, really appreciate all you do. Oh, by the way, get involved in Phyllis Schlafly's Eagles, folks. If you're not, you're really missing out. Excellent organization. And Phyllis Schlafly kind of paved the way for a lot of the leaders of the freedom fight today. So thank you again, gentlemen. Really appreciate you guys, and God bless you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. We'll talk again soon.
Caucus time is now coming to an end.
It is indeed. Man, that was a great... Alex is so rapid fire. Sometimes I feel like there's no taking notes with him. You just have to audio record it and transcribe it later because he just... stuff goes. And that was more history even than I bargained for. That was...
Yep.
That was good.
But it was good. We hope you learned something, and I know that I'm going to have to go back through and take notes because it was a lot to take in at once. But there are many threads that we can pull, and lots of history that we can dive into. But like we always say, we're not here to provide all the answers. Alex was here to provide a lot of
all
answers.
The answers.
But we're here to ask the questions, and if you have more questions after that, definitely go check out Alex at The New American and at Liberty Sentinel, and we will have all of the links to his websites and his social media where you can find his writings and all of the resources that he talked about. We will have all of that in the description, which is why you need to go to unauthorizedcaucus.com.
Yep, that'll be all a big post there if you want to get a hold of it. Plus, like I said, when you're over there, first of all, if you're just watching and you're not a subscriber on Rumble, shame on you. Fix that with a one-button click. Hit the big, give us a thumbs up. That'd be nice. And then subscribe to Unauthorized Caucus there on Rumble. If you want to directly support us, you can do it there. You can do it over on Substack too. And then, of course, as we talked about at the beginning, go to phyllisschlafly.com, especially .com/collegians. Find the big broadcast from earlier, and like I said, that web page will serve as the landing spot for lots of clips and a breakdown of each speaker and anything else that kind of comes up as we go forward, because this was not, sometimes there are timely discussions that are quickly timed out. This is not one of those. This program, the time we spent with collegians, frankly, this conversation we just spent with Alex here, these things are going to last for a while. It's going to be very relevant, and I hope that you'll share it. Share this out, this video. Go find the collegians and watch it. Share it out with friends and family because we hope it'll spark a lot of good discussions for all of you. So, like, share, and subscribe. Unauthorized Caucus and Phyllis Schlafly Eagles. And then, of course, also make sure if you're on the podcast, rating and review. That is so very helpful. We appreciate those. And that's it for us today. So we will see you next time. It'll be another week, whenever that week is. Maybe another interview. You never know. And it will be, of course,
Caucus time.
Caucus time.